that goes along with the notes for trigonometry, which we often call SOH CAH TOA. SOH CAH TOA is a way to remember the trig notes. So you have a foldable, and you can start out by folding it in half this way. If you want to line it up on a line, you can. Also, some people like to leave a little bit space here. That means it won't line up so they can actually see the SOH CAH TOA. One little correction we're going to make right away is because of the copier, the way it copied. The SOH CAH TOA did not line up, so we're going to change this one to say tangent, and this one to say sine. So now it's lined up right. I didn't want to make new copies. The copier flipped it on me. So what do we need to know to be able to do trigonometry? So it has to do with labeling your triangle every time. So all right triangles be labeled the same way. I'm going to pick a reference angle, an angle we're going to look at. It's often called theta. And just like before, the side opposite the right angle is always called the hypotenuse. So I'm always going to label that first. No matter which triangle, that is the hypotenuse. And then based on where my reference angle is, I have two angles, depends on which one they give you. The side touching it is called the adjacent angle. So adjacent. And then across from that reference angle is the opposite. And it's as simple as labeling your triangle this way every time. Find your reference angle, label your triangle. So now, what does SOH CAH TOA mean? Okay, it's an abbreviation, so I'm going to open this up. It's an abbreviation, and SO stands for sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. We're going to make ourselves some fractions. And CA, cosine, equals adjacent over hypotenuse. That's why we have the letters. And tangent equals opposite over adjacent. So you're going to get a triangle, and it's going to tell you some sides, and you'll be able to find this ratio. There's a number that you can get from your calculator or a table, and sometimes you'll use it to find angles, sometimes you use it to find sides. So let's set this up. Okay, so I know this is my hypotenuse. So to find the sine of angle A, sine SO, right, like that, just to help you remember, the sine of A is the opposite over the hypotenuse, so 6 over 10. You could reduce that to 3/5 if you want. The sine of angle B would be the opposite over the hypotenuse, which would be 4/5. The cosine of angle A, again, the hypotenuse is always this longest side. Adjacent is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. You can reduce. You won't need to when you solve. And the cosine of angle B would be the adjacent over the hypotenuse. You reduce that. And those are the trig ratios. So the tangent, again, that's the hypotenuse. The tangent of A would be the opposite over the adjacent. So 15 over 20. The tangent of angle B would be the opposite over the adjacent. And essentially every problem that we set up will be using those ratios. So you're going to look at a problem and you're going to say, okay, I have my reference angle right here. This is the hypotenuse. And if I want to find a certain side, like this side, let's say I want to find this side, I look at the opposite over the hypotenuse. So I would write an equation, the sine, so the sine would be the sine of 21 degrees equals the opposite over the hypotenuse. For the cosine, I look at my angle, and again, I label my hypotenuse first. I can do the opposite and adjacent in my head as long as I don't mess up the hypotenuse, because the hypotenuse is adjacent, so it can be confusing. So the cosine is CA adjacent over hypotenuse. So the cosine of 37 equals x over 13. And then the tangent, if I want to find x, label my hypotenuse. The tangent, TOA, is the opposite over the adjacent. So when you say SOH CAH TOA, pronounce it funny like that so that you can remember those abbreviations. This is the way to remember which ones go where. Okay, so this is a video on how you set everything up. So any triangle, let's make a general rule here. Let's make a right triangle. If I'm talking about this angle right here, theta, this is the hypotenuse, this is the opposite, this is the adjacent. It's going to make up a triangle side here. So this is 5, 12, and 13. So the sine, SOH, of angle C would be 12 over 13. The cosine, CA, would be the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and the tangent, TOA, of C would be the opposite over the adjacent. Okay, so things that you may want to recognize from this is that the sine and cosine will flip for the other angle. So A, the cosine, CA, it would be adjacent. It would be 12 over 13. It would be the same as the sine. So that will fill in your foldable. We will go through and I'll have another video on how to solve these little equations once you get them. Pause, rewind as you need to fill things in.